What is truth, really? Is it an absolute, unchanging principle, or a fleeting illusion shaped by power, language, and belief? Friedrich Nietzsche posed radical challenges to traditional ideas of truth, suggesting that what we call truth may simply be a useful fiction, a product of human constructs rather than an objective reality. This philosophical inquiry navigates Nietzsche's ideas and their relevance in today's world, questioning whether truth exists and if it even matters. Friedrich Nietzsche offered a groundbreaking and unsettling critique of truth that questioned the very foundation of Western philosophy. In his essay on Truth and Lies in a Non-Moral Sense, Nietzsche suggests that truth is not an objective reality, but rather a set of metaphors, illusions, and human constructions that have been socially agreed upon and worn smooth by time. He asserts that what we call truth is merely a mobile army of metaphors, metonymies, and anthropomorphisms. In essence, linguistic devices that humans have forgotten are not literal. According to Nietzsche, language is inherently deceptive because it abstracts and simplifies reality. For example, when we label something as a leaf, we ignore the unique characteristics of each individual leaf. We create categories to navigate the world more easily, but in doing so, we distort its complexity. Over time, these simplified concepts become institutionalized, and we begin to mistake them for objective truths. Nietzsche sees this process as a form of intellectual laziness and a survival mechanism, rather than a quest for deeper understanding. This radical stance subverts centuries of philosophical thought, especially the Enlightenment belief in reason and objective knowledge. Nietzsche believed that even science, which claims to be based on objective truth, is guided by assumptions and metaphors that reflect human perspectives and values. Truth, then, is not a matter of discovering reality, but constructing a useful fiction that helps us function. Nietzsche's critique challenges us to reconsider the value we place on truth. If truths are just illusions we've forgotten are illusions, should we still pursue them? Or should we embrace the creative, interpretive nature of human knowledge? In a world increasingly obsessed with facts and objectivity, Nietzsche's view remains a provocative invitation to rethink what it means to know. Nietzsche provocatively claimed that truth is a lie agreed upon, a phrase that challenges our intuitive trust in shared knowledge. In this view, what society calls truth is not an eternal objective reality, but a consensus that has developed over time to maintain order, coherence, and power structures. These so-called truths are constructed, repeated, and enforced until they become invisible, accepted as natural rather than questioned as artificial. This idea intersects deeply with Nietzsche's broader critique of language and culture. For him, truth is a social construct that emerges from human needs rather than any intrinsic reality. We create truths to make sense of a chaotic world, to avoid the anxiety of uncertainty, and to enable collective functioning. However, in doing so, we often trade authenticity for comfort, depth for simplicity. Consider how social, religious, and political truths evolve. At one time, the geocentric model of the universe was a widely accepted truth. It took centuries and tremendous resistance to overturn it. The same applies to moral beliefs, cultural norms, and historical narratives. These are shaped by those in power and reinforced through education, media, and tradition. Nietzsche warns that this process not only obscures the real, but also limits individual thinking and creativity. By calling truth a lie agreed upon, Nietzsche is not suggesting that all claims are equally false or meaningless. Rather, he urges us to examine who benefits from prevailing truths and to remain skeptical of what is presented as self-evident. In an era of misinformation and ideological polarization, this perspective is strikingly relevant. It invites us to challenge consensus, seek deeper understanding, and recognize that truth may sometimes be the most insidious form of deception. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche dismantles traditional moral dichotomies, revealing how truth is often weaponized to uphold systems of control rather than illuminate reality. He critiques the idea that truth is inherently virtuous or morally good, arguing instead that it frequently serves the interests of those in power. For Nietzsche, the morality of truth is not a question of what is right, but of what is useful, strategic, and life-affirming. Nietzsche challenges the Enlightenment view that truth leads to progress and moral clarity. He sees this belief as rooted in Christian morality, which equates truth with goodness and falsehood with evil. But in Nietzsche's eyes, this binary is naive and dangerous. Many truths have been used to justify oppression, colonization, and dogma. By masking authority as moral righteousness, truth becomes a tool of domination rather than liberation. This leads Nietzsche to ask whether the pursuit of truth should always be our highest goal. What if illusions, myths, or even lies are more conducive to life, creativity, or happiness? He admired the ancient Greeks not for their devotion to truth, but for their embrace of art, myth, and tragedy. In contrast, the modern obsession with truth, particularly scientific and rational truth, can become nihilistic when it strips life of meaning and value. Nietzsche advocates for a revaluation of values, including our valuation of truth itself. He calls for a more fluid, dynamic approach, one that sees truth not as a fixed destination but as a creative process. This perspective allows for multiple truths and emphasizes the role of interpretation, context, and perspective. In doing so, Nietzsche opens the door to a more nuanced, human-centered ethics where truth serves life, not the other way around. Perhaps Nietzsche's most famous declaration, "God is dead," marks a turning point in the Western conception of truth. With the collapse of religious authority, particularly in the wake of the Enlightenment and the rise of secularism, Nietzsche saw a profound existential crisis emerging. Without God, the foundation upon which truth, morality, and purpose had rested for centuries was suddenly gone. What remained was a void, and a dangerous freedom. In this context, the death of God is not merely a critique of religion, but a recognition of the shifting epistemological landscape. Religion had provided a stable, unified narrative of truth. With its decline, that unity fractured. Nietzsche foresaw that this would lead to nihilism, the belief that life lacks meaning, value, or truth. If no divine order exists, then what grounds our knowledge? What legitimizes our values? Nietzsche viewed this crisis not only as a threat, but also as an opportunity. The end of absolute truths could clear the way for new forms of meaning, ones rooted in human creativity, strength, and perspective. He challenged his readers to become free spirits who create their own values and truths through willpower and self-overcoming. However, this freedom comes with responsibility. The loss of universal truth can lead to despair or relativism unless it is replaced with a new vision. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, or overman, represents an individual who embraces this challenge, living authentically without clinging to inherited truths. In our modern world, where ideological certainties continue to erode, Nietzsche's diagnosis remains strikingly relevant. The death of God signals more than the end of religion. It heralds a transformation in how we understand and pursue truth itself. One of Nietzsche's most enduring contributions to philosophy is the concept of perspectivism, the idea that there is no single objective truth, but only multiple perspectives shaped by individual experiences, cultures, and contexts. According to Nietzsche, every statement about the world reflects a particular point of view, and no perspective can claim an exclusive grasp on reality. This stands in sharp contrast to traditional metaphysical or scientific claims of objectivity. Nietzsche argues that what we consider objective is simply the perspective of a dominant class or ideology that has succeeded in universalizing its viewpoint. In doing so, it obscures the rich plurality of human experience. Perspectivism doesn't mean that all views are equally valid, but that all views are partial, situated, and limited. Nietzsche's perspectivism is rooted in his deep skepticism of language, reason, and metaphysics. He believed that our interpretations of reality are colored by instincts, desires, and power relations. Even scientific truths are shaped by human interests and the interpretive frameworks we bring to observation and measurement. Importantly, perspectivism invites intellectual humility. It encourages us to recognize the limitations of our knowledge and to remain open to other viewpoints. It also supports a more dynamic and creative engagement with truth, where conflicting interpretations can coexist and enrich our understanding. In an age of polarized discourse and cultural fragmentation, Nietzsche's perspectivism offers a path toward deeper dialogue and self-awareness. It reminds us that no single ideology, tradition, or methodology has a monopoly on truth. Instead, we must learn to navigate the world through a mosaic of perspectives, embracing complexity rather than reducing it to simple binaries. Nietzsche does not abandon the idea of truth entirely. He reframes it as something we actively shape, not passively receive. Truth, in this sense, becomes a journey of interpretation rather than a final destination. Nietzsche's doctrine of perspectivism asserts that all knowledge, especially what we call truth, is shaped by the perspective of the knower. There is no view from nowhere, no pure objectivity. Instead, every interpretation of the world is conditioned by the individual's biology, psychology, culture, and context. Truth, therefore, is never absolute. It is plural, shifting, and bound to the limits of human perception. This view undermines the Enlightenment ideal of a single, universal truth accessible through reason. For Nietzsche, there are only interpretations, and to cling to one interpretation as the truth is to willfully ignore the complex, multifaceted nature of reality. Perspectivism isn't relativism, however. Nietzsche doesn't claim all views are equal. Some perspectives are broader, deeper, and more life-affirming than others. But no single viewpoint can claim a monopoly on truth. In a world of competing narratives, scientific, spiritual, political, Nietzsche's perspectivism invites humility. It pushes us to see through others' eyes, to question our biases, and to recognize the provisional nature of our beliefs. In doing so, it doesn't paralyze action, but deepens understanding. The truth, in Nietzsche's view, is not a treasure we uncover, but a prism through which we learn to see more clearly. And the more perspectives we can hold, the closer we get, not to truth itself, but to a more expansive vision of reality. Nietzsche's suspicion of language lies at the heart of his critique of truth. He argues that language, far from being a transparent medium of communication, is a system of symbols that simplifies and distorts reality. When we name something, a tree, an emotion, a thought, we impose categories that do not exist in nature. The raw complexity of experience is reduced to rigid concepts, stripping reality of its nuance. In On Truth and Lies in a Non-Moral Sense, Nietzsche illustrates how words become fixed over time, giving rise to truths that no longer resemble the vibrant, shifting world they were meant to describe. Words begin as metaphors, fluid, creative expressions, but over time they become conventions, and then dogmas. Conventions and then dogmas. Language fossilizes perception. What we call truth is just linguistic habit dressed up as eternal law. Nietzsche's critique prefigures later thinkers like Wittgenstein and Derrida, who also exposed the limits and traps of language. For Nietzsche, the danger is not just that language deceives, it's that we forget we are being deceived. We trust language to guide us toward truth, when in fact it often leads us further from it. This insight has profound implications. It challenges the authority of science, religion, and law, all of which rely on language to establish truth. It forces us to question our most basic assumptions, not just what we believe, but how we form beliefs in the first place. If language is flawed, then so is every truth it helps create, and yet, paradoxically, we have no choice but to use it. Nietzsche leaves us with a puzzle. How can we seek truth using tools that inherently distort it? In an age saturated with misinformation, conspiracy theories, and algorithm-driven echo chambers, Nietzsche's radical skepticism toward truth feels eerily prophetic. Long before terms like fake news or post-truth entered public discourse, Nietzsche warned that truth could be manipulated, distorted, and manufactured, especially by those in power. Today, truth is not just questioned, it is curated. Social media platforms prioritize engagement over accuracy, allowing emotionally charged falsehoods to spread faster than verified facts. News has become tribal, with audiences selecting sources that confirm their biases rather than challenge them. Nietzsche would see in this a world where truth is no longer pursued for its own sake, but wielded as a weapon in the service of ideology and identity. Nietzsche's perspectivism also helps us understand why people can live in entirely different realities despite sharing the same physical world. His insight that there is no single objective truth, but rather a multitude of interpretations shaped by power and desire, resonates with our fragmented media environment. Each political group, social movement, or cultural tribe crafts its own narrative, often at odds with others. What Nietzsche offers is not a cynical abandonment of truth, but a call for deeper responsibility. Recognizing the constructed nature of truth forces us to be vigilant, skeptical, and ethically engaged. We must ask, who benefits from this truth? What are its consequences? What lies beneath it? Nietzsche didn't live to see the internet or artificial intelligence, but his insights warn us. In a world where truth is easy to manipulate and harder to define, our greatest challenge may not be finding the truth, but resisting the seduction of convenient lies. Nietzsche's philosophy draws an unflinching connection between truth and power. He suggests that what societies accept as truth is often nothing more than the prevailing narrative of those in control. Whether kings, priests, or scientists, those who hold power often define reality for the rest, and truth becomes a function of authority, not authenticity. In this view, truth is not discovered but imposed. The moral truths of religion, for instance, served not universal justice, but the preservation of ecclesiastical dominance. Scientific truths, while more rigorous, are still shaped by institutions, funding sources, and paradigms that favor certain outcomes over others. Nietzsche's critique doesn't deny the value of science or morality, but it urges us to ask, whose interests are being served? Michel Foucault, building on Nietzsche, famously explored how power produces knowledge and how knowledge reinforces power. In modern systems, schools, prisons, media, truth is institutionalized, normalized, and enforced. Those who question the dominant narrative are often marginalized, ridiculed, or silenced. Nietzsche doesn't offer a formula for neutral or objective truth. He doubts such a thing exists. Instead, he calls for a more honest reckoning with the forces that shape our beliefs. He challenges us to see truth as a battleground, not a neutral ground. This perspective is unsettling, especially in democratic societies that rely on shared truths, obsolete. But it also empowers individuals to resist passive acceptance. By exposing the power dynamics behind truth, Nietzsche encourages a more active, courageous pursuit of understanding, one that dares to question the status quo and reclaim the right to interpret reality on one's own terms. To live without absolute truth is to live without the terrifying illusion of certainty. Nietzsche saw this as both a terrifying and liberating condition. Once we admit that there are no divine commandments, no objective moral laws, and no universal truths, we face a blank canvas. For some, this is chaos. For Nietzsche, it was an invitation. Nietzsche feared that the collapse of absolute truth, especially religious truth, would plunge humanity into nihilism, a state in which nothing has meaning or value. If there is no ultimate truth, then why act? Why strive? Why care? But Nietzsche didn't stop there. He saw this crisis as a necessary prelude to transformation. Out of the ruins of false certainties, a new kind of human could emerge, the Übermensch, who creates value, meaning, and purpose from within. In a world without absolutes, morality becomes a choice, not a commandment. This freedom is dangerous, yes, but also powerful. It demands maturity, courage, and self-mastery. It invites us to take responsibility for our values rather than inherit them blindly. Nietzsche's vision isn't relativism or moral anarchy. It's a call to authenticity and self-overcoming. Yet the risk of chaos remains. Without shared truths, societies can fracture, becoming arenas of competing wills with no common ground. The challenge then is not to restore false absolutes, but to find new forms of coherence, truths that are flexible, provisional, yet deeply rooted in lived experience. Nietzsche's challenge is enduring. Can we live meaningfully without metaphysical guarantees? Can we create without clinging, act without certainty, and believe without illusion? In his eyes, it is only in the absence of absolute truth that genuine freedom and genuine truth-seeking begin.